You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and NFP, a national insurance broker with strong local content. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. And as always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today, if he's not the most liked and most beloved racer of the 21st century here in Indianapolis, he's certainly on the Mount Rushmore, known as TK. But we're going to call him Mr. Kanaan.
Mr. Kanaan. Wow, that's important.
For the next hour. Tony Kanaan is today's guest on the Leaders and Legends podcast. He is currently deputy team principal at Arrow McLaren. He is the 2013 Indianapolis 500 champion. He has won so many races in so many places, it would be a colossal waste of his time to list them all. Let's just say he is not only a champion, but a people's champion. Mr. Kanaan, thank you for appearing on the podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. It's, nowadays, I think with the podcast times, it's just more of I've been enjoying it a lot more because you have more time to tell a story and, inspire people. And an interview, you get 3 or 4 questions, but the podcast, you have an hour to talk about. So,
well, we're very grateful for your time. Jacqueline, I love you. Thank you for showing up on the podcast and monitor these proceedings. I'll ask you the same first question, or the same question. It was maybe not the first. I asked Al Unser Jr. and Donald Davidson and Johnny Rutherford and other people. How old were you when you first heard of the Indianapolis 500?
6 years old. I'm with my dad. We obviously, you guys can tell by my accent, I'm not from here. But in Brazil, I used to watch the race with my dad every Sunday, Memorial Day weekend on TV. So, yeah. And the thing that, that made me fall in love with the Indy 500 at 6 years old was watching the winner taking the picture with the pile of cash. So I'm not going to lie. That was, as a 6-year-old, that was the coolest thing I've seen. So that's why I got hooked right away.
Was the 500 something that fueled your interest in racing, or did your interest in racing make you follow the 500?
No, I mean, at that age, I think if you talk about the majority of kids, you play with cars. And my dad was a huge race fan. So in my house, it was always about racing since I've known myself. I don't think I recall prior being, to my, 5, 6 years old. I don't remember much how that got. I just remember that was a thing that my dad actually got me to do with him to watch. We watched the Formula One races in the morning because the time difference in Brazil and Europe, and then the Indy 500 used to be in the afternoon. So for me, it was always that was what got me into it. So I fell in love since I was a little kid, and play with cars and all that.
Well, you anticipated my next question, which is Formula One is so big. Is that something that first got your attention and then you decided to go a different way? Or how did you kind of decide which circuit of racing?
No, so Formula One obviously was always a goal as a little kid. And then, but the Indy 500 was always the Indy 500, right? So you're talking about a single race. But at the time, for the old timers, you remember even some Formula One guys will come in to do a one-off at the Indy 500. So the Formula One was for me, the path. But as I started racing, I was 8, and my dad passed away when I was 13. And the thing is, the story, maybe getting ahead of the game here, but Dad got sick, had cancer for a while, and the night before he passed, I went to visit him in the hospital, and we had a chat. And Dad was, like I said, he was sick for a little bit, so he was trying to kind of like prepare me for the worst, which at the time, I don't think you never want to believe you're going to lose your dad, right? So he made me promise him the night before I left to go back home, that if something would have ever happened to him, he was going to take care of my mom and sister, and one day to win the Indy 500 for him, because I obviously, the impression of the cash and this and that, and I think since then IndyCar became obviously the goal.
Your goal. I read in several articles how much the passing of your father changed your life in terms of your socioeconomic standing.
Right.
And we'll get to this, we'll get to our shared love of Indianapolis public schools later, but how that shaped your worldview, not only in how hard you worked, but the benefits of public education, the benefits of not having anything handed to you.
I think, let's go back to, my early days. Dad, mom, my dad was from Lebanon. A very, my wife has to take care of my kids and be, very old school. And we're pretty well set. Dad used to own his own company and a mid-class family with all privileges. And in Brazil, obviously, public schools are not that great. It's unfortunately, as a third world country, it's so I didn't go to public school. I went to private schools and so on. So since then he passed, we had some family issues. We kind of lost pretty much everything, with some again family issues that I don't think it's worth talking about. But then reality came, right? So first of all, having a mother that was that young. My dad was 42. My mom was 36. That's quite young. And never worked because of the conditions that could provide. And now we all had to find a job. My sister was 8. I was 13. And I had to quit school to pursue my dream and my promise I made my dad, and mom started to work. So reality hit pretty hard, I think, in a way of, all right, well, now you got to either grow up or just dig in, right? And I think I've never really took it. When I tell the story, I always make sure that people, this is not a sad story. This is something this is life, right? This is how life is. And if there is any positive of losing the most important person in your life at the time, I think it prepared me for life. After that, I think nothing that could have ever happened to me until I have kids is it was going to, put a dent on, or affect me as bad as it did about losing my dad. So I started working on a go-kart factory. I quit school in 5th grade. Started working in the go-kart factory to make some money to help my mom, but also get some equipment to keep racing. And that's how this whole thing begun. I eventually went back to school for another 3 years. So in 8th grade, actually, I had to quit again because then I moved to Europe to pursue my career. So it's a tough sell for my kids when you become that successful and you say, my oldest right now at 17, he's beyond 8th grade already. So they look at me, it's like, don't do what I did. That is not, it wasn't by choice that I quit school, but yeah. And then just really, it was just a matter of, pursuing my promise to him and to a lot of people there that don't know the story. I mean, the frequent question was, how did you know it was going to work? Or did you have a plan B? And I said, I have no option. And plan B was plan A. It was going to make it work. So obviously the path, we can go through it. It was not, a path is always, the most frequent question. I love to tell the story to kids to inspire them because I don't think, racing is very, like, people think you have to be rich to be racing because it costs a lot of money. In this sense, yes, it makes sense, but also I'm the example that you can make it happen if you put the effort in. A lot of things I had to give up. I think, my kids make fun of me because any sports they want to play besides racing, which they don't race, they go to their mom because I can't play anything because all I've done was racing. So I'm terrible at everything else. So jeopardized a lot, not jeopardized, but gave up a lot of things in my life just to pursue my dream and become a race car driver. But had to grow up pretty quick and, move away from Brazil, which, at 16 years old, living in a race shop, which this is what I did for 4 years, on a mattress on the floor in my boss's office and working on a race car to be able to race. And all my friends back home having fun, going to nightclubs and getting cars and girlfriends and all the stuff. It was a transition, but it wasn't a bother.
Real quick, is there anything about which your kids don't make fun of you?
My accent, they do. Yeah, like the only thing they cannot make fun of me is how good I drive. So that's the only thing I can stick to it. Everything else, it's they don't think I speak English. They're bilingual, but when you learn English or any other language from birth, it's amazing how they can switch without. You wouldn't be able to tell if they speak in Portuguese. You think they're Brazilian. When they switch to English, they're Americans. Not the case with me.
The greatness of Romance languages.
It is. And obviously I've learned how to speak English thanks to my wife. 17 years of private school, I guess, with her at home. But at home I only speak to them in Portuguese, which is cool now that they're growing, a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. And so the mom learned how to speak Portuguese as well, Lauren, which is funny because then she speaks Portuguese with an accent. And I speak English with an accent. And story time, bedtime stories, I'm only allowed to read books in Portuguese because they say they cannot understand the story if I'm speaking
Your English is fabulous.
Tell them.
How many languages do you speak?
4.
I'm going to guess. English, French, Portuguese, Spanish.
No. You missed one. Italian. So not French. I speak English, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish.
And once you've learned one and you grow up as
it's so much easier.
Romance languages. There's another Romance language that people don't think of. Romanian.
Yep. Yeah, I think I truly believe. So I went from Portuguese to Italian first. I came to America in 96. I spoke 0 English. But once you learn one, no matter what, it's for some reason it's easier to pick up the next one. So
you are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is 2013 Indianapolis 500 champion and current deputy team principal of Arrow McLaren, Tony Kanaan. Jacqueline and I were just in Scotland. A lot of people asking us, where are you from? Which part of the state's right for the accent? You say Indiana, kind of quizzical. You say Indianapolis, okay. But then we always, every time, have you heard of the Indianapolis 500? Everybody went, okay. Now I've got a frame of reference. Do those of us who've lived in Indianapolis our entire lives have a conception of how gigantic the 500 is, the greatest spectacle in racing is in other countries to other racing fans?
I don't think so. I think you should. Indiana people are pretty proud, and I think I married an Indiana girl. I think you guys, I should say, because I'm not from here, but I consider myself from here, a Hoosier, but it's just the normal, right? Everybody, you guys were born, you knew the 500 exists, you drive by the track, and that month of May is every house decorates with checker flags, and so it becomes normal, but again, just coming from abroad, I don't think you guys realize how big this place is. I think it's not. I think you guys know, but you don't know. You know what I mean? It's hard to explain. It's like you have no idea how big this is. Think about it. IndyCars. Why it called IndyCars? It's because of Indianapolis. It's not because of somebody came with a name. it's not a race car that raced in Indianapolis. It's Indy cars, right? So, which is amazing because speaking of, a kid that dream about winning this race and going through the 12 years of just heartbreaking times at the 500 and winning, how that changed my life for many reasons. You just become a different person. Not yourself, but like I was Tony Kanaan. Now I'm an Indy 500 champion, Tony Kanaan. And that is something that, like even the smallest things. I mean, you're talking to somebody that probably don't know who Tony Kanaan is, but then you say, what do you do? He says, I'm a race car driver on a random conversation around the world. And the guy says, oh, okay, well, what do you race? Indy cars. The guy says, oh, the Indy 500. I said, yeah. And then when you tell them that you won, then it's like, no way. There's no way I'm talking to a guy that won the Indy 500. So it's big.
It reminds me of the story where an actor named Walter Matthau told an actress, I think it was Louise Fletcher, after she won the Oscar for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and talk about how her life would change. And he said, from now on, even in your obituary, you'll be known as Academy Award winner.
Correct. That's what I told my wife when I'm no longer around. That's what needs to say on my, what do you call?
Your tombstone?
My tombstone. But actually, we shouldn't even talk about that. But
Did you have a favorite driver coming up?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, obviously, nowadays, I think the Americans will relate to Senna. Ayrton Senna was a huge F1 guy, and one of my heroes, obviously, in Brazil. He was still 30 years later. I think 15 years ago, if you mentioned Senna in America, people had no idea. Nowadays, with Formula One, that was an F1, but an IndyCar, I always relate. With all the respect to Johnny, Mario, but AJ was always my guy just because we have similar personalities, although people don't believe that, but yeah.
Which would be more fun, watching an Indianapolis 500 with you, with one of your drivers on the pole, or watching Brazil in the World Cup finals?
Well, as a race car driver, I'll pick watching the race with me, but I'm not a good watcher. I get so nervous. I've learned since I've retired last year. I don't know how you guys do it. I told my mom that. I told my wife that. I'm like, it's terrible. I get so nervous if I'm not in the car. So it's, I think it would be more fun to watch with me because you see how much I would freak out. And it makes no sense because that's what I did for a living. But
it's hard not to critique?
No, actually, no. It's not about that. It's like, I'm just nervous, like watching, my guys, like in the timing stand. Pato was fighting for the win this year. I just want to sit down and didn't want to watch. My mom, I can assure you that since go-karting, after go-karting, my mom never watched my races. She would be present, but not watching. And I only understood that this year, because the last 3 laps, I just sat down and kept my head down, and I kept hearing the crowd. I'm like, what happened? What's happening? I didn't want to watch.
There's nothing like a full house at the Indianapolis.
No, 500. And then to me, that is something that, I think the only not bad thing, but I think in racing that you can't hear the crowd from inside the car, right? So, which in a way it's good because you don't get, the crowd reaction and lose concentration, but at the same time, with my own experience all these years, how nice the fans were with me and driver's intro and how they greet you, and then the whole place, 400,000 people like cheering for you. It's something that it's really special to me when people ask me, there's so many special things about the win in 13, but one thing that I will never forget was after the podium, you hop in a car and you do a lap. And for some reason, I guess everybody stayed to watch me. And that is a picture in my mind that if you talk about, Sonny, what was the highlight? Like, is it the moment that I celebrated, I was pointing to the air, telling my dad that I did, kissing my wife? all those are very special. But that moment there, that lap, I think it's so vivid in my mind that it was the most special thing about it.
You mentioned that because to me, and maybe you remember this, and you've certainly seen the footage, the most memorable image of A.J. Foyt winning his fourth in 1977 was the fact that Tony Holman, dying of cancer, got in the car with him, and they rode around together.
Yeah, I mean, to me, obviously, again, it was, I think, if you look about my story with IndyCar and the Indy 500, I mean, the fan base, what I've heard over the years, was they always sympathize that, I had so many, I mean, I led more than 200 laps total before I even had won the race, and the misfortunes, but I was always extremely respectful to the track. I've never really held anything against the race. I was always like, hey, as long as I'm being able to compete here, I know I'm good. It might happen, it might not. I was okay with it.
All those single digit finishes.
Right. I mean, you talk about finish second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. It's like, come on. But, I think that is something that, to me, that's what people actually, got. I acquire a lot of fans because of that too. Not just the story promising my dad, but I think it was always like, hey, one day it might happen, and hopefully the track will pick me. I kept saying that, and I think that was extremely, for me, looking the reaction of the people, because even the other day I have 4 kids, but I only had one at a time. So the other 3, they know, they've been around, but they don't. Like, the best experience they had, I think, was last year on my farewell, that actually I took them to driver's intro. And that moment there was when my 8-year-old looked at me and says, oh, Dad, you kind of like a big deal here. I said, come on, man. But that there, I was able to explain to them further down the road, like a few weeks later, watching my Indy 500 and them watching on TV and seeing how the fans react, is to see how for the perception of a kid is like, how come all these people are happy for you? Because it is like they have nothing to gain, right? I mean, I got all the glory. We celebrated. They all went to their houses. Next day was Memorial Day, but whatever. You know what I mean? So, and that is something that I show them, that it's not just about the win. It's about the appreciation and how you can bring joy to people, even though you're not benefiting from it. You can be happy from somebody else. And so there's so many things that involve that win that you can use as an example, not about the trophy, not about the Borg that sits in my house, like in a very specific place that I walk down every morning. That's the first thing I see, apart from my wife when we wake up. But there is a lot more into it than just the win. And my biggest fear, on Monday after the race, we go and we kiss the bricks and we take the picture early in the morning at the track. It just hit me. I looked at Lauren and I said, Lauren, does that mean like now nobody's going to cheer for me anymore because the anticipation of winning? And she's like, I guess you'll find out next year. And I was like, no. So obviously that didn't happen.
You mentioned not being able to watch. So how did Lauren, Mrs. Kanaan, how did she handle her husband, who she loves more than anyone else in the world, doing turns, taking corners at 240?
Look, again, you know that because you have your missus here, and you just told her how much you love her in the beginning. But they're so much better than us, because I that's what I said. I've watched the footage of my win, and I can see her shaking because it was under the yellow, right? And it was so dramatic. It was a restart, and I said, I don't care. I'm just gonna go. And the way she was shaking, I'm like, I would passed out. If I was watching myself live, I would have been just wake me up when it's over.
The year, forget you guys would know. Looking at Chris Spangle, who's a gearhead too. The guy driving the National, was it Hinchcliffe? Who was it drove with the Indiana National Guard car and crashed?
Hildebrand. crashed.
Hildebrand.
And Dan Weldon won.
Yeah, that happened exact 20 feet from where I was sitting.
But
You
that's what
simply
I'm saying.
couldn't
Like,
believe it.
Even like nowadays, every once in a while, I'm not that vain that I'm going to sit down and say, let's watch my Indy 500 win again. And I'm going to tap myself in the back. But, you do speeches and people play, the footage. And like I said, the other day, my kids asked to watch. I'm like, that's cool. Let's do it. Even watching then, like just actually last night, for some reason, we're sitting down trying to watch something on TV and my YouTube popped up. For some reason, my win, I'm like, why? Like it's been, it says posted 11 years ago. I'm like, and I just clicked it. I didn't watch the whole thing. That was the last 22 laps. I did not watch the whole thing, but just like I watched for 4 laps. We were like in the middle of something before we went to bed, and you're thinking about anything that could have gone wrong. So because I just know that because I just watched last night. I pitted way earlier than everybody else. I was a lap down with 22 laps to go. Because obviously the pit sequence, and then it started with 15 to go. I was second, 10 to go. I was first, and then I shut it off. I'm like, I don't want to watch it, which I knew would happen already. But like, you know what I mean? It's like then you go back and you go, but something could have happened in that pit stop. I was a lap down. How did I? So it's you go crazy, like you said it, and that's why. You never celebrate until you cross the finish line. Look at JR. That's something he's going to haunt him for the rest of his life. He was, 200 feet away from...
And the crowd just felt so sorry for him. Yeah. I mean, I was in the Army, so I wanted him to win for obvious reasons. But the 500 has had its share of... And has a... I'm going to say reputation. That's not the best term. An aura of heartbreak.
Look, I think that place is... Again, I know you guys will understand, but for the listeners that haven't been here, that place is magical. There is something in there. It's not the energy when you drive in through that tunnel. The race day when you have 400, it's just different. And to me, I kept saying the track will pick the winner, and there is something in there that if you think about it, yes, it was JR's worst day probably. And then who won the race? Dan. And Dan ended up passing at the end of the year. He was struggling. So to me, it was written there. The track was like, I'll give you one last thing for you. Your kids will remember. Whatever that is. People can say I'm crazy, but I truly believe that is something in there. And the track will always going to be dramatic. It's you talk about, it's no different than any big event. It is the biggest event, single day event in the world. But then you're going to compare to the final of the World Cup, or that's every 4 years. The Olympics, anybody that goes to the final, you have one chance. And for us, we're probably luckier than football. We'll say you go to the Super Bowl every year, so we have that. But like Olympics, you have another 4 years, right? And for me, preparing that, it took me 12 years. So every year is like, another 364 days that I need to prepare myself. And that is something that I don't think people will understand when the expectation, the preparation, the dedication, everything you do. And at the end of the day, one person is going to be happy. And 32 guys are going to be really mad, right? I would say the last guy is not as mad as the second guy. The second guy is the worst. I mean, I can tell you for sure from every angle. The celebration, the prize money, you get $3 million to win, $300,000 for second. It's just like, just really like the first loser of all. So yeah, it's and it can get to your head. It's.
Last question on this topic, because I'm interested in it only because of some of the things you've said in the past few minutes. Do or did other racers feel sympathy or a shared sense of heartbreak for the Andrettis?
That day?
Ever. The whole time.
No, obviously,
all those starts.
Marty was the only one. Mm-hmm. Michael for sure. And Marco had one really good shot at it that actually cost him. It was a downshift, and yes, 100%. I think it's that's what I'm saying. It's the track, but for some reason, I mean, look at Michael. Like, I obviously, out of those 12 tries, they were all with Michael Andretti's team. So the curse was actually not the curse. I shouldn't say that. People said that might be the curse when I was just going to become another Michael Andretti, which I know how that bothered Michael and still does.
And the Indy crowd, the Indy people love Michael Andretti.
But look at the resemblance. I'm like, I don't want to believe that. I want to change that. And you know, ironically enough, I had a contract with Michael at the time, got let go by his team, basically fired, and went to a very small team. And that win in 13, his cars actually finished second, third, and fourth. So it was kind of like the track's trying to tell you something, but you know, I did not win with Michael.
You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest is Tony Kanaan. It's hard to, unless you read, and I've been lucky enough to interview a few drivers or watch interviews with them, to understand everything racers, race teams go through to make it to the 500.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it used to be 50, 60 years ago, it was sprints, it was dirt cars, all sorts of things. How important to you, and how influential has the climb been? You finally make it to the mountaintop, the Indianapolis 500. Then you're a champion. Did you think those days about 15, 20 years prior, like, man, I was sleeping on the floor at the go-kart place, but if I hadn't done that, maybe I wouldn't be here?
Yeah, I mean, yes. But, you know, careers, especially as a race car driver, everybody had the different one. Some people had their parents that fund their entire career and they made it. Some people have a sponsor that believed it on them. And some people like me had to fight for it. I think it's not fair for me to judge, because a winner of the Indy 500 is a winner, no matter what. Now, there are more rewarding wins, I would say, because of your story. But at the end of the day, and you also look at, you know, if you pick the winners, some guys won the race because, like I said, you got to be in a position that is not, you can't say, I was lucky and I won. You were in a position, and for a misfortune, JR crashed, Dan won. You can't say Dan was lucky. He was, but he was second. Mm-hmm. The other 32 guys had the same opportunity that they weren't. But you can see some people that won and disappeared the next year and didn't have a career anymore, but that's what they have a win. So some wins, if you look at the history of it, you can pick some of the guys that they changed their lives, but not really. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to say, you know, it's more or less, but it is. Like, some of the drivers just disappear. Some of them are happy just to do that and said, oh, now I'm done. I'm good. For me, I've never thought that way because I didn't think life owed me anything. I just felt like since I lost my dad, I just had to fight for everything I wanted. It. So for me, it wasn't like, actually, it's funny because my wife made a comment the other day as far as like, she says, you just work better in the chaos. Because I guess chaos was a pretty strong word to say, but like, because actually she walked in, I was working out with the TV on, I was on the phone, on the treadmill, and I had music as well. So it's like, how can you do that? And then I think, you know, being put in a difficult spot my entire time, I think I learned how to operate a lot better under pressure than actually. When the situation is too good to me, I'm looking around and say, what's going to happen? I'm waiting for something to happen. So to me, it wasn't like, you know, oh, life owed me that. Now I really deserve that. I never felt that way. I felt like all I needed it to do is to put myself in that position and fight. And that is, and whatever the outcome was, as long as I understood I was okay with myself for whatever the outcome was, then it's fine. I didn't want to prove anything to anybody. I didn't want to set an example to anyone. It was just obviously after the fact. It's good to tell the story to inspire people if that's the case. But to me, it was more of finally did it. I mean, but it wasn't like, oh, it's more rewarding. That paid off. I never felt like people needed it to feel sorry or, oh, because I slept on the floor, I deserve more than the guy that had a perfect family, a house, and money. That doesn't matter. I mean, you deserve. There's many ways that you be able to fight and deserve for things. It doesn't mean that my struggles, I deserve more than you or anybody else.
How much does crashing or the potential for a crash run through your mind as you're climbing in the car, as you're driving? You know, I interviewed Johnny Rutherford. He was involved in one of the worst crashes in the history of not only the 500, but racing, the Sachs-McDonald crash in 64. How does that, or do you just go, look, it's just part of it, and if it happens, it happens. It doesn't, it doesn't.
It's funny how I think psychologically, to be honest, I think we need to have to be like conditioned and wired, whatever you want to call, to block that, right? Because again, the example that I try to make people that don't race to understand is, do you think about when you leave your house that something's going to happen to you every day? If you get in a car, you think somebody's going to run a red light and hit you. Or, that is a possibility, but you don't think that all the time. Now, every once in a while, you stop in a light and somebody says, oh, man, if I was there, that would have been bad. So it's the same with us. I think as a race car driver, I've always, for myself, I always said the day that I actually think of that is the day that I need to quit. That is not, I'm in the wrong place. I need to be committed. So I was always fine with the fact that every time I climb in that car, the outcome could be the happiest, the saddest as far as not winning, the disappointment. I could have 1 broken bone, 15 broken bones, or never wake up again. I mean, that is a fact. And then I think it's a reality that, I mean, some people think they don't want to talk about it. They think we're uncomfortable talking about it. But if among ourselves, it's actually the opposite. When Dan passed, Dan was really close to me. And we always talked about it. Not always, but like when the conversation came up, it was always like, if you chicken out because I'm not around, I'm going to come hunt you and you're never going to sleep again. You know, it's always like you're going to honor. It's not by quitting. Mm-hmm. You're actually going to honor the guy. So, no, actually crashing was part of it. I had a few broken bones. I had a few scars. It's part of it. And then any crash that I had, the first thing that, you know, that you see, it's very common among every race car driver. You wake up in the hospital and the first question is, when can I get back in the car? Mm-hmm. If you're afraid of that, then is when it's time to stop. And a perfect example of that, if you guys watch my last Indy 500, I was fighting with McLaughlin for 11th, and I passed him on the grass for 11th place. So I come in after the race. We finish, I think, in the top 10. My wife comes to me and says, do you really need that? I said, what? That pass on the grass. I'm like, it wasn't even for the lead. I said, but that's, you know what I mean? That's where we are. And that's what actually she brought it up. She's like, that's you. My last race, it was for 10th. It was not going to change my life. It wasn't a pass for the win on the last lap on the grass. It doesn't matter what it is. This is a race. It's an opportunity to pass. I saw it and I went. I didn't think about, I'm going to do this on my last race so people are going to remember that. So I'm really cool. I just needed to pass the guy, right? And no matter what place it was. And that it still told me, but she says, well, but then see. So then you're not ready to retire. I'm like, no, I think I'm ready to retire, not because I'm afraid of it, because I don't think I'm wired like that. I think I'm ready to retire because I think it's the commitment that it takes to be able to perform at the level I'm getting to a point that, you know, my life is not the same as it was 30 years ago. I have 4 kids. It's not that I think about, if I'm not around. Mm-hmm. It's the commitment, how selfish you have to be to perform and all the things that you give up.
And that happens to be mentioned a lot with top flight, world class champion athletes, the opportunity cost. I'm going to be a champion, but I'm not going to see any of my kids' basketball games, football games, that kind of thing.
That's what it takes, right? I mean, it's a life choice, and you got to be okay with it, because that's what I've always said. I don't regret a bit, and I know some people don't make those choices, and that's why they're not us, right? I'm not saying that if somebody would ask, so Tony, is that the key of the success? I don't know what that is, but that's the way I operate. But if you look at a pattern, every athlete of any kind, that's all they did. Talk about basketball, Kobe Bryant or LeBron, or like they're still going, LeBron's still going and still missing a bunch of things. Obviously, you've learned over the years how to be a little bit more efficient, but the focus, it's nothing but the sport that you do. Anything else, it will come second, no matter what it is. I told you, I have 4 kids. 2 of them, I wasn't even at the hospital when they were born. My wife was there, and I wasn't. I missed that completely. I was racing. I made it the following day, but I had a race. Naturally, somebody would just say, well, I missed it. It's just a race. I'll miss it. It's just one. We have 17 a year. That didn't even cross my mind. And she knew that, and she was okay with that because she married a race car driver or an athlete that was committed to it. Obviously, you adapt, and as you get older, that's when my biggest thing for me was more of I wanted to retire when I want to retire. I don't want to be phased out, because that happens quite a bit with some people, right? You just can't find a ride anymore.
Sure. Or
they don't hire you to play anymore. And that's what I think the misconception of just this year. We had a driver in our team that was hurt. People were like, so you're going to get back in the car? I'm still the backup driver for Kyle Larson next year, because I'm still capable of doing, but that is not the point. The point wasn't physically, because I always took care of myself. It's not like, well, now you can't fit in the car, or I don't know, physically. That is not, my point is my head. It's where I'm at, and then I know what it takes, and I don't want to go back to that, not because it's traumatized. It's just I don't think it's necessary. I don't even think it comes to a point. That's how an athlete phases out, right? Like why the new generation comes, because I was there before. I had Zanardi, Bobby Rahal, Mike Rangetti. I had their pictures. I'm going to beat those guys. And I woke up in the morning and I work out. I went back to, I had nothing. I was single. That's all I did. The focus was to beating those guys. And they had kids. They had different, and you start, overlapping with that. And then eventually it will catch up, because it's not that you're not talented anymore, but your priorities have been changing over the years, and your dedication, priorities, time, it becomes a little bit less and less and less, and then, but that's just the nature. So I decided to retire because I thought it was time. I tried 3 times, right? There was COVID. Then I said I can't race at the 500 without any fans, so I'll come back. I came back and almost won. Finished 3rd, and then Zach called me and said, you want to come back one more time? Like, people are going to make so much fun of me, but I said, this is it, and then I was very okay with it. I don't regret a single time. People are like, do you miss the race car? I said, well, I'm always going to miss driving the coolest car in the world and the fastest car, but do I miss everything else? No, but not because it was traumatizing. It's just because I don't think the effort, the focus has shifted, and you can argue that, you just said it, I'm the deputy team principal. Now I have 120 people. Before I had my team, it was 10 guys that I was responsible for. Now I have an entire team. My life is actually busier than it was before, but it's a different focus, the commitment, the working out, the pressure that you wake up in the morning and somebody wants your job and you're only as good as your last race. And those are all things that I don't miss.
Have you been on the track? Will you drive around the track? Can you just say, hey, I want to take the car for a spin?
Well, with Doug Bowles, a good friend of mine, but I don't, honestly, to take my Corvette around the track is, no offense, it's not fun. It's not an IndyCar.
But like an IndyCar, if you said, hey,
I still drive the 2-seater, right? So I do the 2-seater rides for fans, which is an IndyCar with 2 seats,
That was my son's high school graduation present.
Here we go.
Graduated
So
from
I
Mount
do every
College.
once in a while, but also, so next year, because I'm still the backup driver for Kyle, and the deal is if it rains race day, Kyle needs to go to the 600 in Charlotte because he's doing the double. For me to be eligible to drive that car to start the race, I have to do my refreshment. So I will get to drive an IndyCar again in May for 15 laps on a proper, like the race car, just because I need to guarantee that. So I still get to do it. I still get a lot of fun. And again, it's one of those things, right? This is definitely, I can assure you guys, since I took this job, Kyle did the first race this year with us, extremely successful. I was the backup driver because of the double. This year, I said the same thing I told Zach 2 years ago. This is my last year as a backup. I can't run a team and focus, because I said that too. I'm like, if that's the case, in May, my focus is going to shift again, right? Hopefully, Mother Nature is not going to do that to me, because as much as I love doing it, I think Kyle deserves to do it. But yeah, it's I get to do it. So,
I'm dying laughing inside, so as not to annoy the Leaders and Legends podcast audience, at the absolute putrid look on your face when you said drive a Corvette around, like,
yeah. And again,
So
I own one. It's not.
What's the fastest car you've driven that's not an Indy 500 car? Have you ever taken a Lamborghini or anything like that?
Around the track, I think, is the Z06, the Corvette, because our relationship with Chevy, they sponsor the Speedway, and that's a really cool car. But honestly, I'm not trying to be like, people think, oh, is this cocky guy, like
I love it.
dishing the Corvette or the Lamborghini. I'm like, I have a McLaren. I have no desire of putting that car at the racetrack, because my reference of speed, it's nowhere near what that McLaren can do, or the Corvette. So it's not fun, guys. Sorry.
It's like an F-15 pilot,
Yeah.
flying a Cessna.
Correct.
Like,
Yeah, let's go. Let's go on a Cessna here. Well, okay, it flies, but sorry.
what's your favorite racing movie?
Honestly, it's Cars. It's actually not. It's a racing movie, but it's a cartoon. But yeah, Cars. I'm in love with it. My kids are in love with it. Now, you want to talk a real movie? I would say Ford versus Ferrari. I think it was a movie that I liked the history. I'm old, but not as old as AJ. But I'm an old timer. I felt like I would fit in that era, pretty good.
You mentioned the two-seater ride. We should acknowledge one of the greatest men I've ever met, and that is Jim Voiles.
Jim
who is involved.
Jim is my lawyer,
and he was on the podcast. He was terrific, and he's the things Jim has done for this city and state, let alone just the racing community, is unfathomable.
I mean, we're really close. We do dinner every once in a while. Obviously, Jim is an icon on. He loves racing. He loves Indy, and it's funny because we only communicate through text to go to dinners and stuff. If I ever call Jim, means I'm in trouble with him. I've only done it twice in 25 years, so I think I'm good.
You mentioned another our previous guest on the podcast, and that's Doug Bowles. To me, there is no, and please push back because you have a wider sense of reference than I do. There's no place in this state, and I can't imagine in any other state, where there is such phenomenal leadership as the Roger Penske, Mark Miles, Doug Bowles, Allison Millangton group at the Motor Speedway now. It's absolutely incredible how four of those leaders, winners, champions, have come to the same place. What do you think of the new kind of era of the 500?
I mean, talk about the four names you mentioned, and I mean, why are they successful? Again, to me, is the respect and the love they have for the Speedway, the 500, and IndyCar. I mean, I think that says a lot about anybody can do a job if you love the job. You'll learn how to do it. You know what I mean? Nobody knows a race car driver when I was born. My dad didn't know. I didn't know if I was good enough, but the passion and the dedication. And I think, those guys, they love what they do. And by transparent that passion through the field, I think, that says a lot. And you get the new generation of kids that understand because the biggest thing, obviously, like I said, I have 4 kids, and to me, educating them on the history, it's as important as the present, right? On anything, because I think we can't forget how any product or any series or any sport became what they became. You got to go look and acknowledge the people that actually sacrificed, lost their lives, whatever you want to say. We talk about veterans all the time, so that's why we're here, right? And to me, they keep that alive quite a bit. So that's why, a lot of the traditions of the Indy 500, some people argue, is like, well, this is, the 20th century. We should change this. And that's why they keep it the way it is, because that is still, I think we need to adapt, but we cannot get rid of the history. And those guys Doug Bowles in that track, I don't think there is anybody in this earth that loves more that track that he does. Let's talk about coolest jobs. Race car drivers are cool, but he's there every day, and I don't take for granted. And Doug and I are close because we share the same passion. Mm-hmm. Right? Anything that he asked me to do, I said, Doug, anything that has to do with the Speedway, no matter what it is, you just call. And we do a lot of things for the volunteers, for the community, for the city. It is not just, again, I think I'm speaking more for people that don't know Indianapolis or the racetrack. It's not just a racetrack. I think there is a lot to the community and both, and vice versa, right? Because we do things that the Speedway does things for the community, and the community pays back with the respect and the knowledge and then just the protection and everything else. So I think it's again, I pretty sure that we are not going to create ever again a city in a racetrack or anything like that. It will never exist in a million years. This is just something that it was meant to be here, and those guys they keep the tradition alive, and that's why I think we need more Doug Bowles, more Mark Miles, and more Roger Penske's that saved the series quite a bit. The Tony George, we can't forget about.
That's right.
There was some tough times with the split, this and that, but the passion that Tony and his family and everybody had about the Speedway says a lot, and I think we owe them a lot.
I offer $500 right now to the charity of anyone's choice if they can send me a photo of Doug Bowles sleeping during the month of May.
I agree, and he's always in a suit and a tie, which is crazy. It's again. But that tells you, right? That tells the passion. You talk about we have a change of ownership between the human family and then Penske. Naturally, when you have a leadership change like that, some people, they will put their own people. And Doug's still there because I think Roger knows exactly. He's the right guy for that job. And I think it's amazing what he does, and it's not about the show. It's about the people, the fans, the camping part and the tents, and it's about the fans. It's not about the race. Is just a small part of what's going on.
Well, it's on social media on Bowles' account, whether it's X or Facebook or whatever. He's in a tie taking a picture in turn 3 when the sun's coming up. And the same day, 12, 14 hours later, he's in a tie taking a picture at Gasoline Alley when the sun's going down.
And the night he goes to whatever in the middle of the crowd, that half of people won't remember that he was there. But
let's talk just for a second, because this caught my eye last year. I went to 4 IPS schools, 85, 78, 111, and
wow.
Howe, all of which, 3 of which are closed. One Howe kind of closes, opens, closes, opens. Your commitment, your family's commitment, is a terrific article by Mark Monteith that appeared in May of 23. Mark, if you're listening, thank you for being a guest on the Leaders and Legends podcast. And the importance of education to your family, the importance of being raised as normal as possible. is very important to you and your wife. You stand up for Indianapolis Public Schools. You praise them, and IPS can be an easy target. What made you and your wife participate in this story that basically extols the virtue of a school district?
Well, point number one, you just said it. I think, unfortunately, society are very judgmental. And to me, one of the points is that, like, oh, your kids are in IPS school? Correct. So that will change some people's mind, I think, as far as if you're going to be that, pardon my ignorant, to think that a public school is a bad school, then judge me then, right? Because how come a successful person, are you cheap? Or are you the one like, no, I mean, to me, I would say the most important things are the values, right? And then I think, yes, we have a tendency as a parent to spoil our kids, but also will do what's convenient for us. And when you get in a position that you become a public person, whatever that is, but especially me in Indy, it's a different reality also. Like Tony Kanaan is well known at home in Brazil, but I go to Miami, one or two people recognize me, it's fine. I get out of here, everybody knows who I am, right? So you get perks, which I'm not complaining, but like you go to a restaurant, maybe you don't wait. That is just life, right? So you do, I'm not going to sit here and say we don't take advantage, quote unquote, of that. But with that, the tendency is that then your kids live in this bubble that's what their normal is. But that's not normal, right? And my kids are not going to be as famous as me, probably. And then that's not even the point. The point is, what are the values? And the values to me was always, I came from a wealthy family. We lost everything. And all I had was people. I was lucky to meet plenty of people that helped me throughout my career, that they were like there for me when the hard times came. I also lost a lot of people when the hard times came, because so to me it was more of like, you know what? The tendency will be, what's the best school that everybody goes here in Indianapolis? I'm not going to name names because I don't want to. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. It's more like, what's really the reality? What's about life? It's the difference in classes, right? The difference in, doesn't mean that you have the biggest house in school that you're better than anybody else. You're not. You're just lucky. First of all, it's my house, not yours, right? So you got to get your own house eventually. And more of also supporting the community, because they're great schools. But unfortunately, some people, we just talked about it in the beginning, like they tried to change the name in the past because the judgmental part of it. And then I think I believe we're in this life to make a difference, but make a difference for good. And my kids, it's what's really reality. It's like, give the value that you're very fortunate to have what you have, because I can't provide that and we work hard, but like, that's not what the world is. It's the values, like having a friend that doesn't matter what he has. If he walks to school, or his dad has 10 cars or not, if they make $10,000 a year or $1 million, it's not about that. It's the friends that you're going to make. And I think for Lori and I, that's what was important. I just didn't want to. I think I'm not saying going to a private school is bad, but I think the tendency of us trying to shield and protect our kids, that is more, it happens a lot more. Their reality is a little bit different. And to me, it was more important to have them, the value of the people, making friends because who they are, not what they have. So to me, I think it's more of a, my kids are young. My youngest, it's 6. My oldest, it's my oldest is 17, and I have a 10 and an 8. When they go to their friend's house and they come back to our house and they see the difference, because it is a public school, there are some differences. They go, wow. I said, yeah, see, but that doesn't matter. You're still friends. He's still a cool guy, isn't it? So it's not like, oh, I'm not going to talk to this guy. I actually went through a lot of that because, remember, I told you guys my story in the beginning. We were wealthy, and then when we lost everything, I went to a public school in Brazil, which is not a nice place to be. And you get judged, right? Because my reality was so different that although I came from a different background, so either my clothes were different, but not because I was trying to show off. That's what I was used to. So I would get just, well, look at him. He comes here like dressing like that because people didn't even have the means for that. So in a way, not even in the, but kids are not mean. They just don't know what they're talking about. So to me, it's a much longer answer that I was expecting to give, but I think it's to be honest, the main focus was we have awesome schools and you know what, the system works and why not? So if
we could do 20 podcasts on how much we love IPS.
That's what I'm saying. And my kids, they have the most sincere, genuine friends, and nobody's judging for what kind of shoes they're wearing, what kind of watch they got for their birthday, because I've been there too. You know what I mean? Like my group of friends have not changed. I came from a wealthy family that lost it, but some of my friends stay, and I made some new friends that had nothing. But it wasn't about, oh, you got a Rolex for your birthday. It doesn't matter. So you need a watch, it's a watch. Or you can't afford a watch, you can afford it. But that's not the point. It's what we have between the friendship and how you get. And my kids I make sure that probably, my wife says that, you know, sometimes I'm probably harder on them than I should be. That is something that I don't want him to like have. I said, you know, you get to do stuff because of, you know, what I've done in life, but this is not reality. You know what I mean? You go to a restaurant, you're not going to wait an hour to eat, but that is the reality. The restaurant is full. I'm not saying I'm going to make you wait, but I make sure that they know it, they understand exactly what the difference is. And I think, you know, I would say I lost my dad when I was 13, but the most important part of my life was I had a pretty good based, very well family that gave me the base to become who I am. I had every rights to do anything. At 13, my mother went to work, and I could do whatever I want. I was not controlled by anybody because we didn't have time for that. And my life could have taken a huge turn the other way, and I never did. So I think that's really important. So for my kids, I think that's why. You know,
we have a few more minutes left with champion race car driver Tony Kanaan. You talked about your team and now your new job and your new responsibilities. Deputy team principal of Arrow McLaren. How much different is it, and how do you ignite the competitive juices within you that still burn even though you're not in the car?
It's a big transition, right? I mean, when I took this job, I was supposed to come for race weekends to help the drivers only, and evolved to a full-time job last year, and now taking over with, I think it was just, that wasn't my goal. I'm not saying I didn't want it or I want it. I came in with the same passion I had and I have for racing and being the race car driver. I only know one way of working. It's 100% the whole time. And I think that's what led me here. And for me, throughout my entire career, I only succeed because of the people that I had. My team, my guys. We talked about it a little bit ago. Was I ever scared to get in a race car? I had to trust the people that put in that car together. Right? And it's no different. I mean, I'm out of the car, but I'm still, I think the best way that I can describe how I want this team to be run is it's not my team, it's our team. But also, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to show you by example how hard I work. And that if that doesn't actually ignite you guys, then somebody's in the wrong place, either me or you. Which, no offense, I'm in charge, then it's you, right? So, and that's what I expect. And expectations, reality, and what we can do. I believe a lot of the success is by the people that you have. We're in a very competitive environment. We get judged we're only as good as your last race. But the trust and the commitment, like I said, I go back to the commitment I had when I decided to retire because I don't think I wanted to be that committed. So if you come into a race team and you're going to count that you need to leave at 4 o'clock because you have I understand that, but that's not where I'm at. we need to do it. The successful race teams, you do whatever it takes, but with kindness. And so to me, my biggest job here is not to it's lead by example, but also put the right people in the right place and just let them do the job. You got to trust the people that you have. And to me, I'm one of the first guys here, and I'm one of the last guys out of here. I'm not expecting everybody to do my hours, but my responsibility is to guide the people and stop the biggest challenge in any company or anything is it's managing people, because everybody will think different. But if you got to have the trust and make people believe in what you believe.
We've reached the point on the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests with a bonus 6th question, because I loved Lone Star JR's answer and I loved Al Unser Jr.'s answer. Okay. So I get to ask, hopefully, Mr. Kanaan.
See if it's as good as them, you know.
First question. What was your first job?
I worked at a go-kart factory, building a wheel hubs for go-karts.
What was your first concert?
Back in the day, I think actually it was Guns N' Roses in Brazil.
Hey, that's pretty good. Number 3.
I just like Axl Rose. That's all it was.
He was born right up the street.
Here we go. I know.
When I went to see them a few years ago, he brought the house down when he said, as one Hoosier to another. And
but
the place went crazy.
Even then, people are going to go, oh, it was because he was from Indy. No, but coincidence or not.
Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
I'm not a big book guy, but I would say I don't have a specific book, but if I would read a book, which I've read a few, it would be anything that would inspire you and add something. I would to read a fiction book. I would rather watch a movie, but something that would add to anything that would be motivational or inspiration.
And you can help me because he's going to hate me saying this if he listens to the podcast. But I've been bugging Mark Miles to help me write his autobiography.
You should.
For a few years.
People
now.
been bugging me to write a book or tell someone to, but it's. We'll see.
Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
Well, I can't pick the Indy 500 because I've been there. One that I haven't been?
Any event in the history of the world. Birth of Christ.
Oh, wow. Honestly, I'm going to be very simple. I think I want to witness probably I've never been to a Super Bowl, actually. With the Colts obviously winning, it will be cool.
Well, Pete Ward,
yep,
who's been on the Leaders and Legends podcast, I will make sure that he knows that.
If that happens, trust me, I'll be there wherever that is.
Last question, or question number 5 in this case. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours completely off the record to discuss anything you want, whom would you choose?
Wow. So many people. But I would pick... Honestly, I'm going to go with sports because I think it's... I'm conflicted, so we're going to have to edit because I'm going to have to think about that. But I would say Warren Buffett. It'll be a guy. Not because of the money. It's just I would love to hear like how swings and misfortunes that that he got there and how successful he is because he took so many risks.
Special bonus 6th question. You're a race car driver. You're a champion. The list goes on and on of accomplishments. How the hell do you drive on a city street or on the freeway with the rest of us Hoosiers and not just come apart?
I actually, Lauren, my wife says I narrate, like I speak a lot. So basically I curse quite a bit of people inside the car, not at you, but I'm basically from whatever, point A to point B. I just say, how stupid is that? Why is he doing that? Why is he braking? Why? Why? So, but I shouldn't say a lot because when I'm with the kids, I'm driving a minivan, which makes people laugh quite a bit. So I'm not. I don't drive fast, not because again it goes back to is it going to be as fast as an IndyCar? No. Then what's the point? Oh, I took the exit of 465 at 80 miles an hour. Well, that's not fun. I'm mesmerized. How people do stuff that is like how did they got a license? My biggest pet peeve, which it happens quite a bit more in Indiana, why do you drive on the left lane at the speed limit and you don't let me by if I don't want to drive the speed limit? Can you? But it's their lane. They bought the lane. And you try to pass them, they accelerate. Then it's like then it's a race. Then we have a problem because now, to a point, I need to win that one. So,
do you ever let anyone drive you? Do you ever sit?
No, nope. So that is another thing. You probably knew that. That's why you asked. But so no car service for me. I always wanted to drive. I cannot sit in the back seat because I actually get I barf. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not a passenger, you don't want me to be your passenger, and I freak out. I press the brake pedal that doesn't exist, and I keep saying, "Why don't you go that way?" So I don't. I usually choose to drive myself everywhere. And if you're gonna drive me, you don't. You give me your car and let me drive you. And I have a funny story actually. I landed in Brazil, in São Paulo, my hometown, a few years ago. Usually, either somebody would pick me up, but I would drive whoever picked me up. But for whatever reason, I had to get in a cab because nobody picked me up. I don't remember exactly. So get there. Obviously, everybody knows me. I go to the cab driver. The guy's like, "Oh my gosh, it's Tony Kanaan." And I said, is this your car? Because sometimes it's the company.
Right.
No, that's my cab. He was all proud. It was actually I drove for Honda at the time. It was a Honda Civic. I said, "Would you mind if I drive?" So obviously the guy was happy as hell, and then the passenger seat took pictures, but I drove the cab all the way to my house from the airport because I couldn't take it. So I was a cab driver once.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest today, I'll give you my favorite Tony Kanaan stat. I highlighted it here.
Wow.
In 2004, in the IndyCar series, Tony Kanaan completed all 3,305 laps during the season and was crowned champion. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your love of IPS, what you're doing now, telling stories. It's no surprise why Indy loves you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.